Hello and welcome to Code Over Time. My name is Kev, and in this video I want to run you through how to set up Varcade Games on Linux. So if you don't know what Code Over Time is, or you don't know what Varcade Games is, I've got a couple of videos explaining both of them, so I'll put links here somewhere and you can go check them out and then come back to this video. Basically, we're going to be setting up a actual real world software project, and we're going to be doing it in Linux, so let's just jump right in. So if you watched the previous video, which you really should have, you will have gotten an overview of Varcade Games. You'll kind of know what's going on there, and you will have created a fork of the project yourself. So here is my fork that I created that we will be working off today. So I'm going to start basically by going to the wiki here, which is in the Code Over Time GitHub. So when you clone or when you fork the repo, you won't actually be copying the wiki as well. So you'll need to go to the actual Code Over Time Varcade Games page. And if you look here, you'll see there's in the introduction, there's a dev environment and there's setup for Linux. Now on Linux, you don't really need to do anything except set up Docker and Docker Compose. So I've linked to the actual documentation here, and really you should just follow the instructions for your distro. I'm not going to go into the details here because that can go out of date very quickly, and it should be relatively straightforward to get this set up on whatever your distro is. So Docker Compose, that is all we need to actually get started. So first thing we will do is I'm going to go to my command line and we're just going to create a directory to put the code in. Now you may already have your machine set up with a specific directory to put your code in, but I'm just going to make a new directory called code, and we're going to go into that directory, and this is where we're going to clone our code. So I'm kind of assuming if you're running this on Linux that you have a bit of Linux experience, that you're able to find your way around the terminal at least. If not, hopefully we can kind of learn as we do. So basically all I've done here is in our home directory, use cd, which is create directory, or sorry, mkdir, which is make directory, to create our directory called code, and then cd, which is change directory, to move into that directory. So if I go back to my fork now, you'll see here we can essentially fork our repo. Now, there's a couple of options, HTTPS or SSH. HTTPS will only work if your forked repo is public. Now, I recommend that you do fork the repo and keep it public, and that is because if you want to share your code, or if you want to have someone on the Discord channel, say, review your code, you can easily just share a link to them. We're all friends here. There's no need to have a private repo. If you're worried about people seeing your bad code, don't worry about it. We're all learning here, so keep it public. It will just make things easier, and it makes actually cloning the code easier. So we just need to copy the URL here, and we'll go back to our code directory, and we're going to run the command git clone, and going to paste in the URL. So that's going to go ahead and clone this into Varcade Games. It will create a directory, Varcade Games, which is the name of the project, and then all of the code will go in there. So basically everything you see here is going to be downloaded, and this might take a minute because there are some pretty big files in there, just because there's a game and there's a bunch of assets. So for example, later on we will be adding some sample games using these sorts of sample assets that we have here, like this guy, and that's a pretty big image, and you'll see why later on. We've got some other pretty big images here, so that will take a second to pull down. If you're not experienced with Docker, what Docker basically allows us to do is run a kind of a virtual version of Linux within our Linux environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of the various different components of Varcade Games, we're going to package them up in these little images, and we will just run them on our system. And what it means is when I run this code on my machine, it runs the exact same on your machine. So what's happening in the container will be the same regardless of the environment we're running it in. If you're not familiar with Docker, I'm sure we'll go into that in future videos in a lot more detail. But our code is now here, so we will go ahead and proceed with building it. So we will need to cd or change directory into Varcade Games. You can see there from my command line, we're in our trunk branch. If I do LA or list all, you will see we've got a bunch of different projects here. And the one we're interested in at the moment is build tools. So we're going to cd into build tools. And basically, I've set up the project so that in this build tools directory, we've just got a bunch of commands that make life a bit easier I'm essentially working with Docker Compose, which you may or may not be familiar with, but to save, having to learn Docker Compose and all the commands and all that sort of stuff, which you should do, but to make life easier, I've just added some simple commands where we can do make build. And when I hit make build, that will go ahead and actually try and build our code. Now, we hit our first error here, so we're going to go into debug mode. Now, what's going on here is that the build system or the build scripts don't actually know where our code is. So we need to do an initial bit of setup on this project. So first thing I'm going to do is open our code editor. I'm going to be using Sublime Text. You can use whatever code editor you want, whatever you're comfortable with. And we are going to open our Varcade Games code. So I'm just going to select this folder and open it up. Okay. Now, if we go back to our wiki, to our documentation, we are now at the project setup phase, and you'll see we need to make one change here, which is the error that was given here. You can see it says this build path code website server is not found. The problem here is we basically need to set up an environment variable that tells the build system where our code lives. So to do that, what we're going to do is in our build tools directory, I'm going to add a new file, and we're going to call that file .env.local. I'm going to save that. And basically, this is a file that you can add local configuration to, but it's never going to be committed to the repo. So this is the stuff that's specific to your machine. And I'm just going to paste in the value that, let me zoom in here. I'm going to paste in the value from the wiki. Now, we do need to update something here, which is basically, this is the path to Varcade Games. It's the full path to where the code is located. So if you want to know what that's like on your machine, you can do pwd or print working directory, which will tell you where we are right now. So in my example, I'm at home, code over time, code Varcade Games. For you, if your name is Jane, it'll be home, Jane, code, Varcade Games. If your name is Billy, it will be /home/Billy/code/Varcade Games. So basically the thing you're changing here is you need to put in your username. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to put that in here. And that's it. So now when we go to actually run our build command, it should hopefully just work. Okay, so back to our command line. Let's try and build now. Now we're going to hit a problem here, and basically we have an issue with permissions. So this is a Docker problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to give Docker access to a certain file that it needs access to. So for example, if I do docker ps, you'll see that we have a permission denied error here. So we can do this command. Now, there are a few ways you can actually solve this issue. This is a permissions issue. You can add a Docker user to a Docker group and stuff like that. But this will work for our purposes now. I think it should be fine for you to run this like this on your machine. Though if you have a preference, you can deal with this however you like. So I'm going to run that command. We need to put in our password. And hopefully now, when we run our make build, it'll go ahead and build. Okay, so we can see our Docker images are being built here. Basically, like I said before, what we're doing is we're taking our code, we're basically creating a Docker image, which is a kind of a snapshot of a Linux operating system where we put our code in it and we define all the versions and everything. So we create this little environment that's very predictable, and we kind of understand the state of it, and then we can run that container anywhere. We can run that image anywhere. The way I often explain this to people is, imagine you're setting up your PC, it's brand new, you just got it, and you install everything you want to install. You get your games installed, you Spotify, whatever browser you're using, you load up some passwords and you save them as well. You set your wallpaper, very important. And when you're kind of happy with your setup, imagine you could just take a snapshot, take a picture of that and like wrap it up in a bundle and store that off somewhere. Then at some point in the future, you get a new computer and you don't have to do all that setup. So what you do is you take that bundle that you saved before and you just throw that at your new computer, and all of your settings, all your configurations just there. It's kind of ready to go. That's kind of like what our Docker image is. So we're creating this little bundle with all of our settings, everything we want, everything we need. And that way we can just deploy it on our computer and our game will just work. So this will take a while, depending on your internet connection, depending on your computer. So now might be a good time to just leave the build running and you can go get a cup of tea or do whatever you need to do. So what I'll probably do just through the magic of editing is skip to the point where the build is done. Okay, so to the eagle-eyed viewers among you, you will notice that the lighting has changed. I'm wearing a different t-shirt. It is in fact a different day. It didn't take that long for the images to build. What happened is I recorded the rest of this video and did a really good job of it, and OBS decided to crash at some point in the middle of all that. So I got about half of the video, and then there's the rest of the video was just lost, so now we have to re-record. But it's okay, we will soldier through. The logical stopping point, I think, was where I said we wait for the build to finish, so let's just pick up from there. The last command we ran was make build, and once that completes, we will have all of our images built, and we will basically be able to run the project. So we have another handy command there, which is just make start. And when we run make start, it basically takes all of our images and unwraps them and launches what are known as containers. An image becomes a container when it's running in Docker. And if we do make start, you should see all of our different services all kind of start up like this. Now, if any of these fail for any reason, you can just run make start again. You can run that as many times as you want. It'll tell you that some are up to date, and if any didn't start properly, in fact, just go ahead and run it twice. If any didn't start properly, you'll be notified kind of by the fact that there'll be something that isn't up to date that gets started after the fact. So once we do that, we can do make PS, which shows us all of our processes. Not really processes, strictly speaking, but that is the command that I added, kind of based on convention. And here we see all of our services are up. So if you look under state, this is what we're looking for. They're all flagged as up. And up means they're running, so that means there's only one thing left to do, and that is go to our browser. And when we go to our browser, if we go to localhost :8002, so that's localhost is this computer, 8002 is the port that we're connecting to, so that's where the website is hosted essentially. And it works. Our website is up and running. This is Varcade Games, and this is our homepage. This is all very static though, so what we want to do is actually go in and try and look at some of our games. And if we do continue as guest, you'll see a problem straight away. We've got these spinners, and it doesn't matter how long you wait, those spinners will never go away, and that is because, well, we haven't actually added any games. Even more than that, we haven't configured our we haven't configured our database at all. So the kind of final thing we need to do to get the product working is to configure our database. And we can kind of see the fact that this is broken if we go to localhost 8000, so :8000/admin. Straight away we get a big dirty error where it says table game portal.django site doesn't exist. So this is our admin website where we can actually go and add games and stuff like that, and this is just telling us outright that there is no database. Our website kind of is not handling gracefully that there's no website. There shouldn't be any scenario or no database. There shouldn't be any scenario there isn't a database, so it's not going to handle it very well, and the admin is very explicit about it. So what we need to do is we need to go to our game portal. We're going to log into that container. Remember, that's just like a little instance of Linux that's running within our Linux. So we can SSH onto that, which means we can connect to it, and we can run commands on that Linux instance, just like we can on the Linux instance we're using right now. So the way we do that is we type docker exec -it game-portal bash. So all that means is we are executing the command bash against the game portal container. And what that does is it gives us a command line. And once we're here, if we do ls, you can see, well, we've got all of our game portal code, right? So we can do ls game portal. And that's the same as what you'll notice in your editor, your code editor that you're using. And that's because the code exists on the container and it's being run from the container. So all we need to do here is manage.py and migrate. So this is running the command migrate. Now, if you've ever used Django before, this should be very familiar. If you haven't, we'll get into what Django is at some point in the future. But for now, just run the command, and you'll see that basically it does a whole load of stuff. Hopefully it says OK for everything. At the top, you'll see words like accounts and games and profiles. These are all things that you would find in your database, especially when you look at something like Varcade Games. You know there's going to be games, you know there's going to be accounts. So that is our database setup. Now, there's one last thing we need to do. So we're going to run our manage Python script again. And we're going to say create super user. And what this is going to do is create a basic admin, or kind of our base admin account. So I'm going to give it the email. This doesn't need to be a real email. admin@vcg.com. So this is our admin account. So I'm calling it admin@varcadegames.com. Username, admin, and password. You can give it whatever password you want. If you just put in password as the password, Django will complain at you and tell you that it's too obvious or too simple a password. So you might need to use something a little bit more spicy than that. But at that point, we can just exit, clear our screen, and I'm going to do make PS again just because I like to have all my services up on the screen. But now when we go back to Varcade Games and refresh, no games found. So what this means is our database is working, it's just that there's no games in it. And if we go to our admin page and refresh, hey, we've got our admin. I made a mistake. I recorded this video and I missed a step in the setup. So what I'm doing is I am recording this to show the step that I missed, and I'm going to just stick it in the original video rather than re-record the whole thing. Now, the reason I didn't re-record the whole thing is because this kind of highlights an important concept that I've mentioned a couple of times already, and that is setting up a project is complex and everyone's environment is different, everyone's machine is different. And naturally, I've set up this project several times on my computer, and the reason I missed this step is because the project just worked for me, but it wouldn't just work for you because you won't have done this step. I had done this step previously in previous installations, and the configuration that we're going to add now was already there, which is why I didn't notice that it was missing and that I missed this step. So if we go to the wiki, and after the bit where we did the database migration and we did the create super user, there's this other step here. And on Linux, basically what we need to do is update our hosts file to add a bunch of, what we're doing here is essentially saying if someone sends a request to any of these host names, it will just automatically send them to 127.0.0.1, which is localhost or your machine. And the reason we're doing this is, I'll probably do a separate video on it in the future, but basically a lot of our configuration and internal routing of requests, we use these terminology rather than using localhost, because localhost isn't always the target. So that makes a lot more sense, by the way, in the production environment where usually we'd be hitting a DNS server, just like going to www.varcadegames.com or something like that. But anyway, all you need to do is add this to your host file. Now, if you look at your host file, so I'm going to do cat/etc/hosts. It will kind of look something like that, or should look something like that. You might have some extra stuff added to yours. And what we need to do is basically run this command, and I can click here to copy. And by running this command, what I'm doing is I'm echoing, or basically printing all of this stuff into the etc host file. So I press enter. I need to put in my password, and it gives me the output of what I put in. So if I cat/etc/hosts, once again, you'll see now that file, that this line has been appended to the file. So I can also vim that, and you can see what the file actually looks like here. And that's it. That's the step that I missed. And like I said, I wanted to, rather than re-record the whole video, I wanted to just highlight how there are a lot of pitfalls, even for me, someone very experienced on this project, the person who wrote this project, can still miss these little steps. And this is just a perfect example of the potential hazards or gotchas that you can expect to face when setting up a project. And I wanted to just reinforce that this is normal, that this happens. So anyway, back to the video. So, well, what's left to do other than log into our admin page and actually go ahead and add some games. So our email that we created for our admin account was admin@vcg.com, and then we have our password. I'm not going to save that. So here we have our admin, and here we can actually administer the website. So I can look at all our users. Right now we've only got one, but every time you sign up, so if you do sign in and you create a new account, your users will appear here. I can also go to games, and this is where we can go ahead and add a game. So first, I'm not going to add a real game to begin with. Let's just add a dummy game so we can see what it looks like. So I'm going to add a game called Zombie Ants from Space. You'll see I've actually already configured this. And the reason I'm adding that game is if you go to the website directory and go to sample assets, and you'll see that there's a bunch of images in here, and these are kind of just sample games that you can use, or sample images that you can use to create sample games, just to fill out the website a little bit so that it looks nice. So we've got two here, Zombie Ants from Space. We've got a cover and a banner image. So basically we're going to call our game Zombie Ants from Space. You can call it whatever you want. We've got a description we can have. So ants from space are coming to get you. Watch out. Put in whatever description you want. This is what's going to show up on the actual website. And for client URL, for now, you can put anything in here really. We're going to use this just because it is an actual game. It's not this game. This game doesn't exist, but this is just a placeholder URL. Now for cover art, we want to go to our Varcade Games directory, go to website, go to sample assets. And like I said, we've got Zombie Ants cover. And for banner art, we've got Zombie Ants banner. And we'll make this game single player only. We'll make it active. And I missed this one, stats config. So don't worry about what stats config is now, but in that same directory where the images are, there is a JSON file called generic stats. And we can save that. And if we go back to Varcade Games and reload, hey, there's our game. So Zombie Ants from Space, I can click on that. We can see here's our description. Here's the banner image that we added. No one has registered a score on the leaderboard. Obviously the game doesn't exist and there's no stats because the game doesn't exist. So that is one game added, but let's actually add a game that we can play. And that game is rock, paper, scissors. And this one you do need to configure exactly the way I'm configuring it here. So the ID you need to give it is EX or PS. The name you can put in whatever name you want. Is rock, paper, scissors, apocalypse is the name. You can put in whatever description. Now the client URL, this is important. So http://localhost 8090/main.js. This is basically telling the website where it can download the JavaScript that the game is built in JavaScript. So the actual JavaScript for the game is downloaded and injected into the website. So this is where we tell it where to go get the JavaScript. Now for our images, we want to go back to our Varcade Games directory, and this time we want to go to Game or PS, we want to go to Client, and we want to go to Assets. So here you'll see we have EX or PS cover, which is a nice little cover image there. And banner art, we've got RPSA banner is the file that we want to use. Stats config, in that same directory there's EX or PS stats.json, so we can add that. And this game is single player and multiplayer, and we're going to make it active. So we hit save here. Go back to our website, refresh. And now our website is looking a lot better. We can add more games. There's more sample art. We've got a game called Shed Rules Switch, which is a game that I do plan on making. I've actually started making. That's a game I'm building in Golang. So we'll probably do some videos on that because I'm kind of learning Go as I'm building that game. And this is a game called Shooty Shooty Bang Bang. I'm actually missing some images here. I'll need to update the repo. Anyway, getting sidetracked. Our website looks good. Now we're basically done. This is our setup is done. So if we actually select rock, paper, scissors, you'll see our description went in here. No leaderboard. We haven't played this game, so there's no stats. But we can go ahead and play if we want. And here I can turn on music and sounds. Single player, multiplayer. I've been through this game before in the other video, the intro to Varcade Games, hopefully you saw that. We can go ahead and fight, and it's all working, so we are done. Okay. So everything is now working. You are hopefully set up. If you hit any snags along the way, please let me know. Throw a comment in the comment section. I can try get it fixed or try help you work your way through it. Or you can join the Discord channel where there's, I'll be hanging out. There's other people there that have set up the project. And basically, as I said before, setting up a complex real world project, it is something that is often challenging. When you start your first job or when you change jobs as a software engineer, the first few days of your job is often just getting the code set up, getting the project set up, getting it so that you can actually do your development work. And I think one of the things and one of the reasons I created this project is that something that often shocks developers, junior kind of new developers especially, is just how big and complex the code base is. And people struggle with, how do I approach this? How do I even set it up? How do I approach it? How do I learn this code? It seems like a huge mountain to try and conquer. So What we're going to do in the videos after this, now that we're fully set up, we're going to just get hands-on. We're going to jump into the code. We're going to look at, how do we actually start navigating the code? What are some strategies we can use there? How does all this work? There's a lot of different components. There's an actual architecture here we need to consider. There's things like automated tests and load tests and all that sort of stuff. So we'll do all of that fun software engineering stuff in upcoming videos. But like I said, leave a comment if you're interested and you want to follow along. Please subscribe. You can join the Discord. Again, I'll be hanging out in the Discord. And other than that, have a great day and best of luck with your setup.